I mean, think back to 1994. The smartest minds in like Silicon Valley started making this very loud, very confident prediction.
Right, the dawn of the digital age.
Exactly. They look at the internet and just declare that the traditional brick-and-mortar university was, well, a dead man walking. Physical campuses, they said, were completely obsolete.
Yeah, that the internet was going to wipe them out entirely within a decade.
But the wild thing is they didn't just say it in 1994.
Oh, no. They repeated that exact same prophecy in 2004 and then again in 2012 and, 2019. I mean, it basically became the gospel of the tech industry.
Right. But if you're listening to this deep dive right now, I want you to picture a very simple graph in your head. Like a white background, super minimalist. On the bottom, a timeline from 1994 to today.
Okay, I can see it.
If you look at the line representing the number of traditional global universities over that time, it's just a steady, solid trend moving up to the right.
Yeah, they are growing. They are thriving.
Exactly. Now, on that same graph, draw the line for those disruptive educational technology startups. The unicorns that swore they were going to replace those dinosaur institutions.
Right, the ones with all the venture capital.
Yeah. That line is just a jagged, chaotic series of spikes and catastrophic crashes. A big red downward cross. I mean, the median lifespan for those revolutionary companies, it's less than 3 years.
Wow. It really is a staggering contradiction. I mean, you have an ancient, supposedly outdated institution outliving thousands of agile, heavily funded tech companies that were, frankly, explicitly designed to destroy it.
It's wild. So why did the dinosaurs survive while the shiny, well-funded future of learning went bankrupt over and over again?
That is the big question.
That is exactly the massive question we are unpacking today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are looking at a really fascinating book, 25 Years of Ed Tech by Martin Weller, to figure out how the world actually works behind all the smoke and mirrors of tech startups.
And Weller is honestly the perfect lens for this. Because, he isn't some outside academic critic just taking potshots at technology from an ivory tower.
Right. He's actually built this stuff.
Exactly. He's the ultimate insider. Back in 1999, he was running a fully online course at his university that had, 15,000 students.
In 1999. That was practically science fiction back then.
Totally. He became his university's first learning management system director. He was writing the code, building the infrastructure, and standing on the absolute bleeding edge of digital education.
And yet, after spending a quarter century on the front lines, he writes this book as this incredibly cold, hard, cautionary tale.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this. Let's start with this concept he brings up right away, which explains so much of the hype we see today.
Historical amnesia.
Yes, the historical amnesia of the tech industry. I feel this every single time I watch a tech keynote. It feels like every 3 years, a new CEO in a black turtleneck gets on a brightly lit stage and says, "We just invented online learning."
And nobody in the room questions it.
Right. Why does everyone just applaud?
Well, Weller documents this beautifully. If you go back and look at the public relations buzzwords from 1994, when bulletin board systems, BBS, were the hot new thing.
Oh man, BBS.
Yeah, and you compare those PR words to the language used in 2012 when MOOCs, massive open online courses were exploding. It's identical.
Seriously, like the exact same words.
Literally, you can generate a word cloud for every era of ed tech over the last 25 years, and there is a massive overlap. Words like disruptive, democratizing, revolutionary, first of its kind. I mean, it's the exact same vocabulary recycled every decade.
Okay, but why? I mean, these are smart people, software engineers, venture capitalists. How do they not know that someone tried their exact idea back in 1998?
Because there is virtually no shared history in the field of educational technology. The people who flood into this space, they typically come from software engineering or corporate management.
Not from actual teaching.
Right, not pedagogy. They bring zero knowledge of what educators have actually been doing in the trenches for 3 decades. They spot an old problem, they build a slightly shinier version of an old solution, and because they just don't know the history, they genuinely believe they are the first humans to ever conceive of it.
It's like Hollywood rebooting Spider-Man for the 5th time, but the marketing team insists they just invented the very concept of a comic book superhero. Like, look at this incredibly novel idea, a teenager with spider powers.
Exactly.
And the audience is sitting there going, "We saw this exact movie 5 years ago."
But in tech, the investors buy the ticket every single time. And that's the crucial point here, this lack of memory. It isn't an accident, it's a highly lucrative business model.
Wait, how is not knowing your industry's history a business model?
Well, to harvest venture capital, you have to present your product as a year zero innovation.
I see.
Imagine you walk into a pitch meeting with a VC firm. If you say, hey, we've built a slightly more efficient version of a discussion forum that universities have been tweaking since 1994.
Yeah, you're not getting $1 billion for that.
Right, you get a polite nod and maybe a tiny seed grant. But if you walk in and say, we have fundamentally disrupted the concept of human learning, we have invented the future, and we are the Napster of education.
Then you get the $1 billion valuation.
Exactly. Acknowledging history destroys the myth of disruption.
So ignoring the past is literally a financial requirement. That makes so much sense. To really see how this plays out, we have to go back to that year zero. Let's look at 1994.
The battle of the systems.
Right. This is a battle between a perfect system and a good enough system. I really want to understand why a clunky, kind of primitive web browser managed to kill off these incredibly advanced, specialized network tools almost overnight.
Yeah, so in 1994, if you were communicating online, you were likely using a bulletin board system, or BBS. And the engineers who built these systems were fiercely proud of them.
Because they were super advanced, right?
They were highly specialized, robust, and technologically advanced. You used specific protocols for specific tasks. You used FTP for file transfers, FidoNet for routing messages, Telnet for remote access.
Right. But you also had to understand command line prompts. I remember this.
Yeah.
You had to configure specific software for your modem to handshake with the server. It felt like an exclusive club for people who liked tinkering with modems more than they actually liked talking to people.
And that was the fatal flaw. What's fascinating here is that they were technically perfect for engineers, but they were deeply frustrating for the average person.
I can imagine.
Weller points out that when they surveyed students using these systems, over 60% of them found them incredibly difficult to use for socializing or getting academic help. The technical barrier to entry was just a massive wall.
And then 1995 hits. The World Wide Web arrives with the HTML browser. I remember this era. The early tilde servers. Like, a university would give a professor a tiny sliver of server space, and they'd hand code a deeply ugly web page with a gray background and blue hyperlinks. From a technical standpoint, this was a massive step backward, right? The Unix geeks must have been laughing at how primitive the browser was.
They absolutely laughed at it. I mean, to a systems engineer, the early web browser looked like a child's toy.
Yeah.
It lacked all the deep, specialized functionality of their command line tools.
Right.
But it possessed one superpower that changed human history. It was universal.
You didn't need 10 different programs.
Exactly. You didn't need one program to read a message, a different program to download a file, and a third program to view an image. The browser did it all in one single window.
It's the good enough principle in action. A tool doesn't need to be perfect to win the market. It just needs to remove friction. The geeks can have the perfect code, but the masses will take the easy button every single time. It was the moment the mud skipper finally crawled onto land.
That's right. The web browser lowered the barrier to entry so drastically that suddenly anyone could publish a syllabus or a reading list online. It consolidated a deeply fractured ecosystem.
Okay, so the web made publishing incredibly cheap. Anyone could throw a document online. Naturally, administrators looked at this and made a massive assumption, right? If publishing is cheap, then teaching must be cheap now, too.
A very dangerous assumption.
Let's talk about 1996 and what they called CMC, computer-mediated communication. Because there is this financial illusion around online learning that still exists today. Everyone assumes online education cuts costs. You don't need physical buildings. You don't need printed books. So why is it that when a school doubles its online student enrollment, it actually gets poorer?
This is one of the most persistent myths in all of EdTech. I call it the infinite lecture hall myth. Administrators just assumed that once a course was digital, you could teach 10,000 students for the exact same cost as teaching 10 students.
Okay, if you're listening, I really want you to visualize this because it's a completely counterintuitive financial logic. I asked for a special focus on this because it just blew my mind.
It's a great data point.
Imagine another simple bar chart. On the left side, we have traditional education, like a massive university lecture hall, or even a printed distance learning packet. For that model, you have huge fixed upfront costs. You have to physically build the 500-seat amphitheater, hire the camera crew, print thousands of textbooks. It's millions of dollars.
Right, massive initial investment.
But once that initial check is written, the variable cost, meaning the cost to add just one more student to the class, is basically zero. It costs the university nothing to let one more kid sit in the back row of a physical hall or mail out one extra syllabus.
Exactly zero.
Now, on the right side of the chart, look at CMC, the online model. It flips that structure entirely upside down. The upfront cost is virtually zero. You just click a button to open a new digital discussion forum thread. But the variable cost, the cost of adding students, it shoots up in a steep straight line. There's a huge red arrow pointing up on this side of the chart.
And that red arrow is human labor.
Yes. Why, if it's just digital text on a screen, why does adding a student cost so much money?
Because CMC wasn't about just broadcasting a video. It was about interaction. It was about forums, group projects, asynchronous debates.
Right.
If you want students to actually learn in a collaborative online environment, you can't just leave them alone in a chat room. You need human moderators.
Someone has to read all those posts.
Exactly. You need subject matter experts to guide the discussion, correct misconceptions, answer specific questions, grade nuanced assignments, and, frankly, prevent the forum from devolving into total chaos. The research from the 90s revealed something that absolutely terrified administrators. In these interactive online courses, human teachers and teaching assistants account for upwards of 80% of the total cost.
Wait, really? Over 80%?
Yes. The variable cost is entirely driven by the need for human guidance.
So technology was pitched as this ultimate automation tool, the thing that would finally eliminate the expensive teacher. But when they actually tried to use it for learning, it proved that the human teacher is the most expensive, irreplaceable part of the entire system.
It proved it definitively. When you strip away the physical campus, the dorms, the dining halls, you are left with the absolute irreducible core of what education is. And that is a dialogue between a novice and an expert.
Wow.
And you simply cannot automate a dialogue. You can digitize a textbook in a second, but you cannot digitize a mentor. Education is fundamentally a human enterprise.
You can't automate a conversation. I mean,
No.
I can only imagine the panic in the administrative offices. They had promised the board of trustees that this new internet thing would save millions, and now they realize they have to hire an army of online moderators just to keep the forums running.
Oh.
So what did they do? Did they just admit they were wrong and hire the teachers?
Not exactly. They scrambled to find a pedagogical excuse to stop teaching.
Of course they did.
And that brings us to 1997 and the widespread adoption of constructivism, or what became known as the guide on the side model.
Now, hold on. Putting students at the absolute center of their own learning sounds incredible. It sounds progressive, empowering, democratic. Why did it lead to massive academic failure?
To understand why it failed in this context, you have to look at the physical technological constraints of 1997. We were dealing with 56K dial-up modems. Bandwidth was incredibly scarce.
Oh, right. You couldn't do video.
You physically could not upload a 45-minute video of a professor lecturing. The internet would literally choke on it. So educators were forced to rely on text-based forums. But as we just discussed with that variable cost graph, moderating those forums was intensely time-consuming and expensive. So they leaned heavily into constructivism.
What is that exactly for those of us who didn't go to teachers' college?
Constructivism is actually a highly respected psychological theory. It suggests that learners construct knowledge actively through experience rather than just passively receiving it as an empty vessel.
Makes sense.
But in 1997, it got warped by institutions into a very convenient cost-saving slogan. The idea was teachers shouldn't be the sage on the stage lecturing at students. Instead, they should merely be the guide on the side.
That sounds suspiciously like a cover story for not doing your job.
That's exactly how it was deployed in a lot of cases. The
Yeah.
idea was that you don't lecture, you put the students in the center, give them a broad problem, and let them freely discover the answer together in the forums. But in practice, pure discovery learning without strict guidance is a disaster for novices.
I always think of this like dropping someone in the middle of a dense forest. Like, if you take someone who has never been in the woods before, take away their map, their compass, and their flashlight, and just say, hey, I believe in you. Empower yourself to find the highway.
Yeah, how does that go?
They aren't going to have a beautiful journey of self-discovery. They're going to wander in circles, panic, and get eaten by a bear. You can't just throw a novice into an unstructured forum and expect them to magically deduce calculus.
That's a perfect analogy, and the research backed this up. The evidence overwhelmingly showed that completely unstructured, unguided, free discovery resulted in significantly lower academic outcomes. Students felt lost, frustrated, and totally overwhelmed by the noise of their peers.
They need some structure.
Exactly. To navigate a new subject, a novice needs what educators call scaffolding. They need an expert saying, look at this specific variable, read this specific text, now let's discuss this one constraint. But providing that precise scaffolding requires a highly active, very present teacher.
Which costs money.
Right. By pushing the guide on the side model, institutions were basically giving themselves a pedagogical excuse for absent teaching. They could say, we aren't ignoring you to save money, we are empowering your discovery.
Total freedom in learning isn't liberation, it's abandonment. But this is where the history gets really twisty. Because just 1 year later, in 1998, we actually do see an example where total, unguided freedom worked brilliantly, but in a completely different context.
The wiki paradox.
Yes. How can Wikipedia, an encyclopedia that literally anyone on planet Earth can edit or delete at any moment, have a lower error rate than expert-written encyclopedias, yet when you put that exact same wiki software into a college classroom, it completely falls apart?
It tells us something vital about human motivation versus institutional control. So the wiki was invented in 1994 by a programmer named Ward Cunningham.
Say.
He built it as a fast, frictionless way for software developers to collaborate. By 1998, wikis started appearing in education. Everyone looks at Wikipedia today as the ultimate triumph of the wiki model. Millions of articles, constantly updated, a miracle of decentralized knowledge. But the secret to Wikipedia's success was never the software.
It wasn't the code.
Not at all. The software is literally just a blank web page with an edit button.
Right. So if it wasn't the code, what made Wikipedia work? Why didn't it just devolve into internet trolls deleting everything and writing nonsense?
Because of the ruthless, rigorous human workflow that grew around the software. Wikipedia survived because its community established and enforced brutal filters.
Like what?
Things like NPOV, which stands for neutral point of view, strict verifiability with citations, and a total ban on original research. It is a highly policed, intense social structure masquerading as a free-for-all. But when educators looked at Wikipedia, they didn't see the social structure, they only saw the software. They thought, hey, let's put a wiki in the classroom. The students will collaboratively build a beautiful knowledge base together, just like Wikipedia.
Let me guess. The students just stared at the blank page, or like one type A student did 90% of the work and deeply resented everyone else in the group.
Precisely, because in a classroom, you don't have a massive global crowd of thousands of people to police the content, but more importantly, you have the traditional institutional assessment controls.
Meaning grades.
Yes. Universities require grading. They require individual accountability. A professor looks at a collaboratively written wiki page and says, this is a great article on the French Revolution, but who gets the A and who gets the C?
Oh, wow. You can't grade a collective hive mind. How do you even apply a traditional A through F individual rubric to a decentralized crowd?
You can't. But they tried. Professors would try to track who made which specific edits. They started assigning points per word contributed, or grading based on the timestamps of the edits.
That sounds exhausting.
It was, and the moment they did that, it completely destroyed the organic, collaborative spirit of the tool. Students stopped editing for quality and started editing just to hit their word count for the grade. The wiki was suffocated in the crib by the university's desperate need to assess and control the individual.
Institutions love the idea of open collaboration, right up until the exact moment it threatens their control over the grading system. Once they can't control the grade, they kill the tool.
Exactly. And that obsession with breaking things down, controlling, and measuring every tiny piece of the educational process led directly into the next major era.
Which brings us to the early 2000s, and what has to be the biggest failed dream of the decade. The Lego block theory of education.
The learning objects era.
Right. Imagine if education was actually like Lego. A brilliant professor in Tokyo builds a perfect self-contained lesson on quantum mechanics. They call it a standard learning object. They upload it, and any teacher globally can just download it and snap it into their own course like a plastic brick. It sounds incredibly efficient. Why did this multi-million-dollar dream die such a spectacular death?
So in 2000 and 2001, the entire industry became obsessed with learning objects, or LOs. The goal was to create automated assembly lines for courses. You could just pull a module on cell biology from one server, a module on chemistry from another, and stitch them together.
Sounds great on paper.
But the dream died because it fundamentally misunderstood how human beings actually learn. This was articulated perfectly by a researcher named David Wiley as the reusability paradox.
I want to map this out for you listening, because you can apply this paradox to almost any kind of communication, not just education. Imagine an X and Y axis in your head. The vertical line, pointing up, represents pedagogical effectiveness.
Yeah.
Basically. How good is this lesson for the human student? Does it actually help them learn?
Right, the human value.
And the horizontal line going across represents reusability. How easy is it for a computer machine to strip this file and share it with a completely different system? What Wiley proved is that these two lines are exact opposites. They are completely orthogonal. You cannot have both. If you increase one, you destroy the other. Why is that?
Because of context. For a student to truly learn a complex topic, they need rich, deep, highly specific context. A great teacher weaves in references to previous lessons, inside jokes from that specific classroom, local cultural touchstones, and emotional cues.
Yeah, that's what makes a class memorable.
Exactly. That context is the pedagogical glue that makes the knowledge stick to the student's brain. But machines absolutely hate context.
They just want the raw data.
Right. For a machine to easily share, parse, and reuse a file across different platforms globally, it needs that file to be utterly devoid of specific context. It needs it to be generic, sterile data.
So when you strip all the inside jokes, the cultural references, and the classroom history out of a lesson just to make it perfectly reusable for the machine, it becomes a lifeless, useless piece of data for the human student.
It becomes educational cardboard. It's perfectly rectangular, very easy to stack, and completely devoid of nutritional value. But the tragedy didn't stop at the pedagogical level. It became a massive administrative nightmare for the teachers.
Right, because for the computers to understand these Lego blocks, they had to introduce e-learning standards, things like SCORM and the UK Loan Corps. What did those actually do?
They were massive standardization protocols. There was a government initiative called the UK University that burned through millions of pounds trying to build this perfect automated repository of learning objects.
Okay.
To make a lesson machine readable, they required the human teacher to manually translate the context into metadata. So to upload a single simple learning object, like a 2-minute video clip, the teacher was required to manually enter over 60 different fields of metadata.
Wait, 60 fields for one single file?
60. Title, author, copyright status, pedagogical intent, semantic density, target age range, technical format for every single file.
I'm just imagining a tired adjunct professor at 11 p.m. They just want to share a YouTube link with their students, and the computer system is demanding they define the semantic density of the clip. The teachers must have revolted.
They absolutely did. The entire automation dream was killed by clerical exhaustion. As the standards got more complex, the adoption rate just fell off a cliff. The return on investment for the teacher was literally zero.
Yeah, they get nothing out of it.
They were spending hours doing tedious data entry for a machine that was supposedly designed to save them time. It proved that when education is over-engineered to appease the logic of machines, it loses its soul, and it crushes the spirit of the educators.
When education is over-engineered for machines, it loses its soul. I'll love that. So standardizing the content itself was a total failure. The Lego blocks didn't work, but the administrators still wanted control. If they couldn't standardize the toys, they decided they would just standardize the entire playroom instead.
Enter the LMS.
Yes, 2002 and the dawn of the LMS, the learning management system. Now, almost everyone listening to this has interacted with one of these. Every university, every high school, every corporate HR department bought an LMS systems like Blackboard, WebCT, or Moodle. They bought them to innovate. Why did the LMS become the single biggest roadblock to creativity in the history of education?
To understand why it became a roadblock, you have to understand why universities bought it in the first place. The LMS was the ultimate good enough enterprise solution.
Like the web browser earlier.
Exactly. Before 2002, a university's tech landscape was total chaos. The engineering department might be using one set of homebrewed Unix tools, the humanities department was using a different forum software, and the med school was doing something else entirely.
Sounds like an IT nightmare.
It was. The university IT department was going crazy trying to support 10 different platforms. The LMS came in and offered a neat, unified, centrally controlled package. It had a forum, a gradebook, a file drop, and a calendar, all in one place. None of the tools were best in class, but together they were good enough to satisfy the administration.
Okay, so it solved an IT headache. But how did it kill innovation?
Because of a phenomenon that tech pioneer Jaron Lanier calls software sedimentation.
Software sedimentation, like rocks in a river.
Exactly. Think about how sediment settles at the bottom of a riverbed over years and slowly hardens into solid rock. When an institution buys a massive monolithic piece of software like an LMS, it doesn't just install some code on a server, it builds a massive human bureaucracy around that code.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They hire a whole team of LMS administrators. They sign multi-year, multi-million-dollar financial contracts. They write hundreds of pages of training manuals, establish help desks, and create administrative policies that are entirely dictated by how the software functions. The software settles into the foundation of the university and hardens like concrete.
I always picture building a sandcastle on the beach. The LMS is a plastic bucket. You pack the university sand into the bucket, turn it over, and pull the bucket away. The sand now perfectly holds the shape of the bucket.
That's a great way to look at it.
And after a few years, if a brilliant teacher comes along and says, hey, I found this incredible, creative, new distributed web tool that will really help my students collaborate, what happens? The IT department doesn't look at the pedagogical value. They don't ask if it helps students learn. They look at their manuals and say, I'm sorry, but is that tool on the Blackboard integration roadmap? No. Then you can't use it.
The tool became the boss of the teacher. The architecture of the LMS forces teachers to conform to its logic rather than the software adapting to the teacher's creativity. And if we look at the underlying logic of the LMS, it wasn't revolutionary at all.
No.
It was deeply conservative. It was designed to perfectly replicate the physical bureaucratic classroom. It had a place to stand and deliver content, the file dump. It had a place to hand in homework, the assignment folder. It had a place for the gradebook.
We didn't build virtual classrooms. We just built virtual filing cabinets. We took the most boring, bureaucratic parts of physical school and digitized them. But, as always, human beings look for escape routes. Outside the walled garden of the LMS, a rebellion was brewing among young academics.
Ah, yes, a blogosphere.
Right, this brings us to 2003 and 2004, the era of blogs and OER, open educational resources. I want to talk about incentives here. Why did young, brilliant scholars spend hours of their time writing free blogs when their university deans were explicitly telling them that only publishing in boring, closed, peer-reviewed journals would get them promoted?
Because they understood how reputation and power were changing in the digital age. In 2003, academic blogging really took off. And for a young academic, the institutional rules were clear. Publish in prestigious, highly expensive journals, or perish.
Right. Tenure committee didn't care about a blog post.
Exactly. But these academics realized they had to play what Weller calls the double game.
Double game, like living two lives.
Precisely. They played the traditional game to satisfy the university promotion committees, grinding out dense, jargon-filled papers that maybe 50 people on Earth would ever read. But simultaneously, they played the network game.
On their blogs.
Yes, they took those same ideas, translated them into accessible, engaging language, and published them online. And the results were staggering. The blog posts were read by thousands. They were shared globally. These young academics built massive cross-disciplinary networks.
So when conference organizers needed a keynote speaker, they didn't look in a dusty journal. They looked for the person writing the fascinating blog.
Exactly. The network reputation eventually became so powerful, so globally visible, that the traditional institutions had to recognize it. The blog was the actual engine of their career, even if the university refused to give it official credit initially.
It's the ultimate end run around the academic gatekeepers. But let's look closer at the other side of this era, the OER movement's open educational resources. 2004 is when MIT famously launched OpenCourseWare, giving away all their syllabi and lectures for free.
A huge moment.
Yeah, and Creative Commons licenses allowed billions of resources to be shared. The rhetoric was beautiful, free knowledge for everyone, utopia. But you have a model that explains the somewhat darker reality of this movement. Walk us through the OER iceberg.
The iceberg model is crucial for understanding who actually benefits from free content on the internet. Above the water, in the highly visible tip of the iceberg, you have the OER advocates and creators.
People making the stuff.
Right. These are usually privileged, tenured academics at well-funded universities. They have the time, the stable salary, and the technical support to write free textbooks and preach about the democratization of knowledge. They attend conferences, give TED Talks, and pat each other on the back for being so open and collaborative.
Right, the heroes of the open web. But what's beneath the surface?
Below the waterline is the massive invisible base of the iceberg. Millions of what we call dark reuse users.
Dark reuse.
Yeah. These are overworked, underpaid adjunct professors at community colleges, or teachers in developing nations, or desperate students who literally cannot afford a $200 textbook. They are quietly, frantically downloading the free materials just to survive the week.
And they don't participate in the open community.
They never leave a comment, they never adapt or remix the material, and they never thank the creator, not because they are ungrateful, but because they literally do not have the time, the cognitive bandwidth, or the technical infrastructure to participate in the so-called community.
Wow. So the visible top of the iceberg is celebrating a utopian community of sharing, while the massive invisible bottom is just engaging in frantic, silent survival consumption. That completely shatters the narrative. Free content doesn't automatically create equality. It just exposes the deep desperation of the underfunded masses.
It really does.
You can give someone a free digital textbook, but if they don't have a quiet place to study or a teacher to guide them, it doesn't close the equity gap at all.
It doesn't. And that illusion of free brings us right into the mid-2000s and what we might call the invisible whip of Web 2.0.
Yes, 2005 and 2006. YouTube launches, Facebook expands, the internet becomes highly interactive. And in education, there was a specific pedagogical trend that capitalized on this, the flipped classroom.
Oh, the flipped classroom.
The idea was that students watch video lectures at home for free on YouTube and then use class time to do their homework or active problem solving with the teacher. It was hailed as the ultimate equalizer. So why did it actually cause dropout rates among poor students to skyrocket?
Well, the flipped classroom seemed like a genius application of Web 2.0. Why waste valuable, expensive class time lecturing? Let them watch the video on YouTube at home. For wealthy, middle-class students, it was brilliant.
I'm waiting for the but.
The but is the massive, unstated assumption of infrastructure. A flipped classroom requires the student to have a high-speed broadband connection at home to stream video.
Which wasn't a given in 2006.
Not at all. It requires them to have their own personal hardware, not a family computer that they have to share with 3 siblings. And crucially, it requires a quiet, safe home environment with the time and space to concentrate on an academic lecture. Wealthy students had all of this. Underprivileged students often had none of it.
Right. They might be working an evening job or caring for younger siblings or relying on a single smartphone with a capped data plan.
Precisely. By moving the core instruction from the public classroom into the private home, the school was fundamentally punishing students for their lack of domestic infrastructure. The school was assuming a level of privilege that didn't exist. Consequently, the dropout rates and failure rates in underprivileged demographics spiked.
But hold on, let me push back on this on behalf of the tech optimists. The platforms themselves, YouTube, Google Docs, Facebook groups, they were entirely free for the schools to use. Before this, districts had to pay millions for proprietary software licenses. Weren't these free platforms at least saving the public education system money, which could be redirected to those poor students?
We have to ask why those platforms were free. The business model of Web 2.0 companies is not philanthropy, it is data extraction. These companies provide a free service in exchange for harvesting every single click, pause, and keystroke of the user. When a university or a high school mandates that a student must use YouTube or Facebook or Google to complete their degree, the institution is unknowingly acting as a data broker.
They were legally compelling their students to enter a commercial platform.
Yes. They force students into an environment where their behavior is tracked, analyzed, and sold to advertisers. The school isn't the customer anymore. The advertisers are.
And the students are the raw material. That is a chilling realization. In the digital age, if the education platform is free, the student is the product being sold. It seems like some educators actually realize this trap, because the very next year, in 2007, they tried to escape the commercial web entirely by building their own utopias.
Ah, yes. 2007, the era of Second Life.
The ghost towns of virtual campuses. I find this era endlessly fascinating. Back in 2007, serious tech analysts swore that by 2012, 80% of internet users would live, work, and learn in 3D virtual worlds.
It was massive hype.
Universities spent millions of dollars buying virtual islands in Second Life to build digital replicas of their campuses. Why are those virtual college campuses now completely empty digital ghost towns?
The failure of Second Life in education is a masterclass in ignoring physical reality and accessibility. First, the technical barrier was absurd. To run Second Life smoothly, you needed a high-end gaming computer with a massive graphics card and a pristine wired broadband connection.
So again, the infrastructure problem.
Exactly. If you were a normal student on a cheap laptop in a dorm with spotty Wi-Fi, you couldn't even log in. Your screen would just freeze on a loading bar.
And what about students with disabilities.
It was an exclusionary nightmare. Because the virtual world was rendered as a unified graphical space rather than text-based HTML, there was absolutely zero screen reader support. It was entirely impossible for visually impaired students to use. The complex keyboard and mouse navigation excluded anyone with motor skill difficulties. It was a technology built by healthy, wealthy techies for healthy, wealthy techies.
But even beyond the technical exclusion, I want to talk about the sheer failure of imagination, because I find this genuinely hilarious in a tragic way. You have an infinite, gravity-defying virtual world. You can build literally anything. You can shrink the students down and explore the inside of a human blood cell. You can fly around the rings of Saturn.
So you do anything.
And what did the brilliant educators do with this godlike power? They spent thousands of real dollars to build a virtual brick lecture hall. They made the students sit their avatars in virtual rows of wooden desks, and the professor stood at a virtual podium, often as like a 7-foot-tall purple cat avatar, and delivered a boring one-way 45-minute audio lecture.
It perfectly encapsulates the conservative nature of institutional thinking. When handed a tool of infinite possibility, their first instinct was to recreate the physical constraints they were most comfortable with. They didn't invent a new pedagogy, they just cosplayed the old one in 3D.
We used futuristic, multi-million-dollar technology to perfectly recreate the most boring parts of the 19th century. Just incredible. And this institutional failure of imagination didn't just affect where we teach. It affected how we judge students when they graduate. Let's look at 2008 and something I call the recruiter's lie. The push for digital e-portfolios and digital badges.
The e-portfolio push of 2008 was huge, and the theory was completely sound. A standard university transcript just says B+ in economics. That tells an employer absolutely nothing about what the student can actually do.
Right.
An e-portfolio, however, is a rich digital space containing a student's essays, code repositories, video presentations, and digital badges proving specific competencies. It is a holistic, deep view of the candidate's actual skills.
And when they surveyed employers, 83% of them looked the researchers dead in the eye and swore that digital e-portfolios were the absolute best way to judge a graduate's true skills. They said they love the idea. So why do HR departments instantly throw those digital portfolios in the trash during the actual hiring process?
Because they lied.
Straight up lied.
Or rather, they expressed an idealistic preference in a survey that completely collapsed under the weight of reality. To understand why e-portfolios failed, we have to look at the math of what HR professionals call the decision cost funnel.
Walk us through the math of the HR funnel.
The bureaucratic machine of corporate hiring relies on ruthless, rapid screening. A hiring manager receives 500 applications for a single entry-level job. They do not have time for holistic reviews. It takes an average of 10 seconds to scan a traditional one-page paper resume and look for keywords.
10 seconds to make a yes-no decision.
Right. To properly evaluate a rich digital e-portfolio, to click the links, watch the video presentation, and verify the digital badges takes about 20 minutes.
10 seconds versus 20 minutes. If you multiply that by 500 applicants, well, scanning resumes takes less than an hour and a half of work. Reviewing e-portfolios takes over 160 hours of work.
Exactly. The corporate hiring machine is optimized for low-cost decision-making. The e-portfolio introduced a massive friction cost into the HR process. So despite claiming they loved the rich data, recruiters completely ignored the portfolios and just asked for the PDF resume.
It's like a student trying to pay for a cup of coffee with a solid gold bar.
A gold bar.
Yeah, the gold bar is technically worth vastly more than a $5 bill. It's a better, pure store of value. But the cashier at the coffee shop doesn't have a scale. They don't have a way to make change. They're just trying to move the line along. So they say, look, I just need you to tap your credit card.
That's brilliant.
Digital badges and e-portfolios are just academic toys until the corporate hiring machine fundamentally changes its filters. You can't hack education if you don't also hack the HR department.
And that frustration, the realization that reforming the existing systems from the inside was incredibly difficult, led directly to the most audacious attempt to bypass the institutions entirely. We arrive at the climax of the Silicon Valley disruption narrative.
Yes, the big one. 2010 to 2012. Connectivism, leading into MOOCs, massive open online courses. This is the ultimate broken promise. In 2012, Silicon Valley billionaires stood up on stages and declared that MOOCs would destroy the traditional university.
The end of the university as we know it.
Sebastian Thrun, a famous Stanford professor who founded Udacity, famously predicted that in 10 years, only 10 universities would be left in the entire world. 10.
A bold claim.
Well, 10 years later, universities were completely fine, and Udacity had quietly pivoted to selling corporate HR training videos. What actually killed the great Silicon Valley disruption myth?
To understand the fall of the MOOC, you have to understand its original intent. In 2008 to 2010, researchers developed Connectivism. They built the very first MOOCs as experiments in networked learning. The idea was that knowledge wasn't held in the teacher's head, it was distributed across the network of students.
Like the wiki, almost.
Yes. These early courses were chaotic, decentralized, and highly demanding of the learner. But then, around 2011 and 2012, Stanford professors got involved, venture capital flooded in, and the model was entirely hijacked.
They took this weird, organic, decentralized experiment and applied the Silicon Valley scaling formula to it.
Yes. Companies like Coursera and Udacity formed, and their model was the exact broadcast model we talked about earlier. Record a rock star professor at Stanford, put the video online for free, and let 100,000 people watch it. They literally explicitly compared themselves to Napster.
Wow.
They thought they were going to do to universities what MP3s did to the record industry, but they ignored the fundamental reality of human psychology, and they ignored the data coming out of their own platforms.
Let's look at that data because it is absolutely damning. The PR releases touted massive numbers. 100,000 people registered for our Introduction to AI course. But when you looked at the completion rates, only about 10% of people actually finished the courses. Why did 90,000 people drop out?
Because the MOOC platforms stripped out all the human support systems in order to scale infinitely. They removed the teaching assistants, the study groups, the office hours, and the emotional fear of failing in front of a professor.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Even if 90% drop out, 10,000 people still learned AI for free. Isn't that democratizing education for the developing world?
That was the rhetoric, sure. But the demographic data revealed the brutal truth. Surveys showed that over 70% of the people who actually completed these MOOCs already possessed a college degree, often a master's degree.
Wait, really? So they weren't educating the uneducated masses?
No. MOOCs proved a very specific theorem. You can distribute content for free, but you cannot distribute motivation and support for free. The people who succeeded in MOOCs were successful professionals who had already been heavily trained by traditional universities on how to study, how to manage their time, and how to learn independently.
They already had the scaffolding.
Exactly. They already possessed the cognitive scaffolding. Novice learners who need that scaffolding the most dropped out immediately. Silicon Valley treated education like a simple file transfer problem. They thought moving a video from a server to a human brain was the exact same thing as downloading a song. They fundamentally misunderstood the emotional and psychological labor required to learn something difficult.
Silicon Valley treated education like MP3 file sharing. That is the core error. They didn't actually want to democratize education. They just wanted to be the new software vendors, selling services to the very universities they claimed they were going to destroy.
Pretty much.
When they couldn't bankrupt the schools, they settled for selling them server space. But, having failed to disrupt the system from the outside, the tech industry decided to do something arguably much more insidious. They started monitoring the system from the inside.
We moved to 2014 and the rise of learning analytics.
The digital panopticon. This sounds like science fiction, but it's completely real. An algorithm can now predict with 90% accuracy which student is going to drop out of college before the end of the semester. But here's the moral dilemma. If the algorithm labels you a failure on day one, is it saving you, or is it executing a digital death sentence?
When students moved on to these digital platforms, the LMS, the MOOCs, the online libraries, they began generating millions of data points. Every time they clicked a link, paused a video, or logged in late at night, the system recorded it. Tech companies realized they could feed this massive data set into predictive models.
Sounds useful in theory.
The promise was benevolent. We will spot struggling students early and intervene to help them. But the reality is what sociologists call the dark loop of analytics.
Break that dark loop down for us. Data is collected, metrics are displayed on a dashboard, and interventions are made. What is the danger?
The danger is that algorithms do not eliminate human bias. They harden it mathematically. An algorithm looks at historical data to predict the future. It might notice that students from a certain zip code, or who work part-time jobs, or who scored poorly on one specific quiz, historically drop out at higher rates.
Right.
So on day one, the dashboard flags a new student with a giant red warning light. Now, put yourself in the shoes of an overworked teacher with 200 students. You look at your dashboard, and the machine tells you, with 90% certainty, that student X is going to fail.
I see exactly what happens. The subconscious reaction kicks in. The teacher thinks, why should I spend my limited extra hours tutoring student X when the billion-dollar computer says they are doomed anyway? I should spend my time on the kids in the green zone who can actually pass.
Exactly. The teacher subconsciously pulls back their effort. The student senses they're being written off. They lose motivation and they drop out. And then the algorithm updates itself and says, see, I was right. My predictive model is perfect.
But it was only right because it created a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. It didn't predict the future. It engineered it. We built these systems to open up education, but learning analytics threatens to turn schools into surveillance states. It's the digital panopticon, the feeling that every single click is being monitored and judged by an unseen warden, leading to a permanent algorithmic record that you can never escape.
Are we building schools to elevate human potential? Or are we building digital prisons optimized for sorting humans into predetermined socioeconomic buckets? If students are treated as mere data points rather than complex humans with the capacity to change, the algorithm stops being a support tool and becomes a tool of systemic oppression.
It's a dark path.
Which leads us right into the peak of tech hubris, 2016 and 2017. AI and blockchain. I have to ask, why is selling a blockchain university diploma exactly the same as a medieval alchemist trying to trick a king into believing he can turn lead into gold?
Oh, the blockchain era. In 2016 and 2017, we hit the absolute peak of the hype cycle for AI and blockchain in education. And Martin Weller makes a brilliant point here about zombie ideas.
Zombie ideas?
Yeah, in edtech, there are certain ideas that die, get buried, and then violently claw their way back out of the grave every decade when a new technology comes along. Automated robotic tutors, which failed in the 1980s, and micro-credentialing, which we saw fail with e-portfolios, are classic zombie ideas.
And along comes blockchain, the ultimate solution, desperately searching for a problem.
Yes. Tech vendors flooded into universities saying, we need to put your diplomas on the blockchain. Now, let's think about this logically. A university diploma is already a highly verified, centralized database system. If an employer wants to know if you graduated from Harvard, they call Harvard. Harvard checks their database and says yes or no. It works perfectly.
Right.
The problem in education is not that we have a massive crisis of counterfeit diplomas that requires an immutable, decentralized, cryptographically hashed ledger to solve.
It's a magic trick. The tech bros show up in a bespoke suit, they throw a smoke bomb of impenetrable black box jargon, immutable distributed ledgers, smart contracts, neural networks, and they completely overwhelm the university administrators.
They prey on the fear of missing out.
The deans get scared that they are missing the future, so they write a massive check. But the smoke clears, and you realize they haven't actually improved a single student's ability to learn algebra or write a coherent essay.
It is modern alchemy. The medieval alchemist blinded the king with sulfur smoke and Latin phrases. The tech vendor blinds the provost with algorithms and blockchain jargon. But the fundamental truth of education remains untouched. The real problem in modern education isn't a lack of cryptographic hashes. It is a lack of human connection, a lack of funding for teachers, a lack of safe environments for students. Technology cannot solve sociological problems no matter how many buzzwords you attach to it.
The real problem isn't a lack of cryptographic hashes, it's a lack of human connection. Which brings us to the present day and our final era. From 2018 onward, what scholars call the dystopian turn and reclaiming the future. Because if every single click a student makes is monitored, if every lesson is chopped up and automated by a machine, and if every human is reduced to a predictive data profile, is education even about the human soul anymore?
That is the exact question scholars began asking. By 2018, the literature in edtech took a sharp dystopian turn. In the 90s, the writing was optimistic wikis, blogs, democratizing knowledge. But today, the literature is dark. Scholars started pushing back hard against this surveillance-heavy reality.
Pushing back against the tech.
Yeah. They argued that we have allowed tech companies to redefine the purpose of education as simply data extraction and workforce preparation, stripping away the civic, moral, and humanistic goals of learning.
And this brings us back to the survival of the university.
Yeah.
The very first question we asked. Why did the dinosaurs survive? You frame this as a clash of two different frequencies of change.
Yes. Think of Silicon Valley as operating on a high-frequency screech. Move fast, break things, pivot, disrupt, burn it down, and build it new every 18 months. It is chaotic and exhausting. Universities, on the other hand, operate on a low-frequency bass drum. Boom, boom, boom.
They're slow.
They are slow, deliberate, bureaucratic, and highly conservative. They are designed to preserve human knowledge over centuries, not financial quarters.
So universities shouldn't be embarrassed that they don't move as fast as Uber or Facebook. Their slowness is their ultimate feature, not a bug. They survived the last 25 years because they resisted toxic disruption.
Exactly.
When Silicon Valley said, fire all the teachers and use our algorithm, the universities moved so slowly that the startup went bankrupt before the university could even form a committee to review the proposal. The slowness protected the students from being beta testers in a failed corporate experiment.
That's a great way to look at it. Technology is never neutral. It always carries the biases and the business models of its creators. The dystopian turn isn't about rejecting technology, it's about reclaiming it. It's about saying, we will use the web, we will use video, we'll use data, but we will adopt it slowly, deliberately, and with human values at the absolute center, rather than corporate profit.
What an incredible journey. From the clunky command lines of 1994 BBS forums, through the wild west of wikis and blogs, past the billion-dollar graveyards of MOOCs and Second Life, right up to the surveillance algorithms and blockchain alchemy of today. Thank you for guiding us through this 25-year history of hype and amnesia.
It's been a privilege. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Please do.
For 25 years, the tech industry's obsession has been asking the question, how can technology change education? We assumed tech was the hammer and education was the nail. But as we step into an era where deepfakes, AI-generated reality, and algorithmic polarization threaten our very concept of truth and democracy, perhaps the next 25 years shouldn't be about technology changing education. Perhaps it should be about education being the only thing left that can save us from the technology. Think about that next time you log in.
Is education the only thing left that can save us from the technology? Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking past the buzzwords, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.